Oh, no, the 6th is Wednesday. You're right.
Okay, so in lab this week, we're going to continue muscles, and you're going to get the final list of the other muscles that you need to know in a table format and with some images. So it'll be primarily like the abdominal region and the lower legs is what we need to go over the rest of the body. So we were talking about biomechanics, and does anybody remember what the last thing we were talking about would have been? Lever system. So in a lever system in your body, what would be the lever? The bone. And what is the fulcrum? The joint. And what is the effort? Muscle contraction. Excellent. Okay, so we have two different types of levers. Classified as to like whether or not it takes a lot of effort to move the load or little effort to move the load. And so one of the things that we can talk about are what are referred to as power levers. Okay. These work at a mechanical advantage. So this means that you can lift a large load using little effort. Okay, so that's the first type of lever. Then we can also talk about speed levers. And speed levers work at a mechanical disadvantage. And we have both of these in our body. Most of our levers are actually this second kind. So mechanical disadvantage, because this allows us to move small loads really quickly, right? So it moves small loads quickly, but with much effort. So an example of a power level would be a car jack, right? In the body. Also, a example of a power level is the ankle joint where we are standing on our toes. Right? So if I stand on my toes, right, I'm lifting my entire body, and it doesn't seem like it takes that much effort to do that, right? And the muscle involved would be my gastrocnemius muscle, my big calf muscle. And then you have a tendon, which is called the Achilles tendon, that runs down the back of your ankle, right? And that lifts the heel up off the ground, okay? An example of a speed lever would be like a shovel. And it always amazes me when I'm shoveling, like even if I just pick up a tiny amount of dirt, it seems like it takes a lot of effort, right? It's like, what the heck? And I've had teenagers come over, the wimpiest teenagers, you know, they're really good at math and they're really good at computers, but watching them shovel is like so painful, right? Because it's like they just pick up the littlest amount and they just move it just a little bit, right? But speed levers, shovels are not a very, well-designed way of moving a lot of dirt. It's better to put the dirt into a wheelbarrow and wheelbarrow it than it is to move it via a shovel, okay? So if we look at an example of this, so this is my effort. And one of the things that that video talked about is that the effort is further away from the fulcrum than the load. So this would be my power, right? So effort is farther from the fulcrum than the load. So that would be under a power one. And remember that if we increase this they use the seesaw as an example. So if you lean back, right, that increases the lever arm, and then that would allow you to pick up a larger load, okay? So then if we look at the shovel example, notice that the effort is actually closer to the load than at the fulcrum. So we have the effort closer to the load than the fulcrum. So the effort in this case is actually in the middle, and your fulcrum is actually at the end. Okay. So if we look at some examples, we can classify levers as class 1, class 2, or class 3. So the first class lever is like what we've been talking about with the seesaw. So you could just think seesaw, right, is your first class lever. And just remember that the fulcrum is in the middle. And so some of these can be at an advantage and a disadvantage depending upon how far the effort is away. So it can act as a mechanical advantage or disadvantage. Okay. So in the example, they actually use a pair of scissors, which is actually a really cool machine, right? And so a good example of this in your body is this diagram right here.
Are you recording?
Oops, yes, I am. And I don't know where my diagrams went. So I think they're here. Okay, so this is a first class lever. Okay. So I gave you a sheet of paper that has this. And so your head, your face is relatively heavy, right? It's got all the bones, musculature in it. And in order to like pull back or to lift the chin up, that would be requiring a lever, right? So this is first class. So my fulcrum right here is the joint between the atlas and the occipital bone. So this is between the the atlas and occipital bone, right? So the atlas being the first C1 vertebrae. So your first cervical vertebrae, the joint between the first cervical vertebrae and your occipital bone. And remember, the axis also allows for rotation. Okay, so that's your fulcrum. And to lift to the head, this is actually a muscle called the splenius muscle, right? And this is the weight of the front of the head. So this is my load, this is my effort, and this is my fulcrum. Okay, so if we look at these other ones, the second class lever is a good example of this is the shovel, right? Oh, actually, no, my second class lever is not the shovel. This is where the load is in the middle. So this would be like a wheelbarrow, okay? So just put second class, load is in the middle. Okay. Now, is the effort always further from the fulcrum than the load in this case? If the load is in the middle and the effort is on the other side, then the effort is always further away from the fulcrum, right, than the load. And so in this particular example, these always work at a mechanical advantage. Okay. And we'll go back to that image in a minute. But then we'll talk about the third class lever. And this is where the effort is always in the middle. Okay. And so if you look at this, is the effort always closer to the load, or closer to the fulcrum, excuse me, than the load? If it's in the middle, it's always closer to the fulcrum, right? So this is actually always at a mechanical disadvantage. Okay. And so a simple machine would be the tweezers. So if we look at these images, so this one. So this is the biceps muscle. So it's actually the biceps brachii. Remember, there's also a biceps femoris, which is in a hamstring. It's one of the hamstrings, okay? And this joint would be the elbow joint. Right, so it's between the radius and the ulna and the humerus bone. Okay, so looking at your descriptions, which class of lever would this be if the effort is in the middle? Third, right? Effort is in the middle, right? So this is my third class, right? This would be my load, but even if I'm just lifting my forearm and don't have a weight on it, that is also still the load, okay? And so what is it called when if I had this weight in my hand and I slowly extended my arm with control? What type of muscle contraction is going on in the biceps then? If I'm extending the muscle, but I still am contracting it? Yes, eccentric, isotonic eccentric. So remember, eccentric muscles, contractions are the ones that work your muscles the most and create the most muscle soreness, right? So slowly putting the barbell down is actually more work for your muscles than picking it up, okay? So this would be my effort. This would be my elbow joint. This would be my fulcrum. And then actually both of so the lower arm bones would be the lever. The radius and the ulna would be, in this case, the lever. Okay, so this is at a mechanical disadvantage, right? So it takes a lot of effort, more effort to lift that weight than the weight itself. Okay, so this is an example of a second class lever. So in this case, the load is in the middle. And in this case, it's in your entire body weight, right? You're lifting up your entire weight of your body and balancing on the toes. So this is actually, what bones are these right here? Metacarpals, and then these are the phalanges, right? So this is metacarpals, and these are my phalanges, like my finger bones, my toe bones. Okay, and then this muscle up here, there's actually two muscles here they've drawn. So this is my gastrocnemius. And why do they named it the gastrocnemius? It has a big belly. And then underneath the gastrocnemius is a muscle that is a synergist to the movement, and it is called a soleus muscle. And soleus means flat. And so it is a flat muscle that is underneath your gastrocnemius. And so that is actually part of the calf. And those two muscles work in synergy with each other to lift the heel. So you notice that they're actually articulating with a bone. This is actually my calcaneus bone. So they're articulating with that calcaneus bone. And then this soleus muscle actually goes all the way to the phalanges. Okay, so this would be my fulcrum and my effort. So is it this at a mechanical advantage or a disadvantage? Advantage. So this is a mechanical advantage. If you tried to use your biceps to lift me 150 pounds, right, that would be really hard, right? But I can do it pretty easy with my calf muscles, right? Okay. Any questions about those lever systems? Nope. Okay. So biomechanics is really interesting. You can take whole classes in kinesiology and understanding the mechanics of the body. And sometimes they talk about kinetic chains, which are really interesting because if something's happening down here, say if something's happening in my elbow or my wrist, it could affect the whole chain of joints and muscles that go up the body, right? So kinesiology is kind of the study of biomechanics. I can spell that for you. I've always wanted to take a class in that, but I've never done so. And that has to, kinetic is energy, right? So studying the energy, the movements of the body, the energetic movements in the body. Okay, so let's look at this one. So what is the fulcrum? This would be of jaw, excuse me, I guess I need to show you movement, of your jaw opening. My jaw joints, right? So this is my fulcrum. This is the actually the temporomandibular joint. So that's my mandible attaching to my temporal bone. Okay, so jaw closing, where is the effort? In the masseter. And where is the load? The lower jaw, right? So this is my load. Okay, so effort is in the middle. So what type of lever system is this? If effort is in the middle. Third class, right? So this is my, is that right? Effort in the middle? Make sure. Yes, it is right. Third class. Okay, so is that at a mechanical advantage or disadvantage? Disadvantage. Okay. So we are going to move on today to another chapter in your book, which is called Special Senses. So this is actually, does anybody know what chapter this is? What is it? 16, 15? 15. Yeah, okay, thank you. And I added some more mastering assignments. I'm not sure if they're showing up in the Canvas, but if you remember, if you go to the mastering assignments link, it'll link out to your mastering assignments. And you have one that is due this Sunday, which is over just the eye. And it's 15 questions just over the eye. And we're going to start talking about the eye today. And then there's another one over the rest of the sensations like smelling, tasting, hearing. And then there's also a skeletal muscle physio-X, which is due next week. And then I'm going to give you the opportunity to do an extra credit endocrine physio-X. And so that will be due the last Sunday before final exam.
The final exam will be on the
It's on a Monday, yes, if that's what.
So we were looking at it on the syllabus. It says that the lab finals are on a Wednesday, right? Is that right?
It's just confusing in there because it is just lab finals that week.
Oh, okay.
So it's not on. That's just the The Wednesday is when we have lecture, but it's just the lab finals that week. Okay. So what type of tissue are the sensory receptors? Are they connective, epithelial, muscular, or nervous? Nervous, right? So this is nervous tissue. Right? So sensory receptors are modified neurons that are able to detect stimuli. And what is the process where they take that stimuli and they turned it into an action potential? Called. What is that process of going from a stimulus to an action potential? Does anybody remember? It has a name. It is called transduction. Right? And then that action potential gets sent into the central nervous system, and it can go to the appropriate spot in the cerebral cortex to be consciously perceived as a sensation. But also remember that not all of our stimuli are external. They are when we're talking about the special senses, but they can also be internal. So we have receptors in the medulla oblongata that sample chemicals in the blood, for example, and tell us if we need to breathe more, right? If we need to get rid of CO2 in our body. So these can be external as well as internal. So we're going to talk about the special senses. And these include sight. So this would be light energy. And the type of receptors that are involved in this are called photoreceptors. So they have the ability to absorb light and transduce it into an action potential. We also have hearing, right? What type of energy do you think the hearing is? Sound waves, which is mechanical energy, right? So sound waves are actually traveling through and moving molecules in the air. And so these are called mechanoreceptors. And they're actually a special type of mechanoreceptor, which is called a hair cell. So if we look at a hair cell, it has these little cilia on top. So these are the cilia. And then this is my axon. And so as sound waves move, they can actually move the cilia, right? So they're moving through the air. They can cause the cilia to bend. And when the cilia bend, that causes ion channels to open and this cell to become depolarized. And this would be my axon. And then this would be the synapse. So this is my axon, and this is my synapse. We also have equilibrium as a sense. And what do you think equilibrium refers to? Balance. And also orientation. So I can tell if my body is moving, right, by sensing the movement of fluid in my inner ear. I can tell if my body is upside down by knowing that, and I can tell if I'm spinning. Sometimes when you're driving in a car, it doesn't feel like you're moving because you've equilibrated, but when you speed up or slow down very suddenly, then you can sense the movement. And so balance just gives you a way to orient to gravity in your environment. We also have smell. And what type of things, what is the type of energy? in smell? It would be chemicals, right? So it'd be chemical odorants. So these are in the air, so they're airborne, the odorants are, right? And these would be chemoreceptors. And then we have taste. And these are also chemical in solution, so they have to be in water in order to work. And these are also chemoreceptors. Okay. So the special senses do not include touch. They do not include pain. They do not include proprioception, like the muscle spindles that are in your legs. And then they also don't include the internal, all the internal receptors that we have to detect internal stimuli that helps to help maintain homeostasis. Okay, so when we look at the structure of the eye, we can look at the structure of the external eye. Okay. Sometimes these are called accessory structures. So we have what are called the extrinsic muscles. And these are different than the intrinsic muscles. And these are skeletal muscles that attach to the eyeball. And they cause movement of the eye. Right? So being able to look up and down and side to side, right? We talked about all those cranial nerves, like the ocular motor, that innervates these extrinsic muscles and allows the muscles to move. Okay. We also have the eyebrows, right? And the eyebrows are actually protective. One of my daughter's friends shaved off her eyebrows and then had to draw them back in. Thankfully, they grew back. I didn't want to tell her that sometimes they don't grow back. You know? It's like, they grew back. But anyway, it's like sweat. Like when your brow sweats, this helps to keep the sweat from running in your eyes, right? So if you ever exercise profusely, sometimes you have to wear a headband, right? Because your eyebrows can't do all that for you. And then if you've ever been in a dusty environment, your eyebrows collect dust, right? So they're protective as well. We also have the eyelashes. And these are very sensitive, right? So if you even like touch your eyelash, your eye will automatically close, right? To protect the eye. So eyelashes are actually another really important part of the external structure of the eye. Okay. Then we have what are referred to as the eyelids. And these are called palpebral or palpebral. Let me see if I can spell that right. I don't think that's right. Palpebral. Let me look it up. I just learned how to say this word, actually. I thought it was really cool. Palpebral. Palpebral. Nope, I was right. That's how you spell it. Okay. So the eyelids help to protect the eyes, and obviously they close if they're stimulated and there might be danger, and then we close them when we sleep. Not all animals have eyelids. Some animals do not have eyelids, like aquatic animals. Fish oftentimes do not have eyelids, right? They do not close their eyes, and so these are protective. And the palpebral fissure, gosh, I can't spell today. Fissure, the palpebral fissure, that is actually the opening of the eye. So that is like, you can see that it's kind of the oval shape where this is the opening between the eyelids. We also have some glands. So we have the lacrimal glands. So the lacrimal glands actually sit above the eye and to the lateral side. So that if you put your hand right above your eye or right below your eyebrow, you can kind of, well, that's where they would be, right? And so sometimes when our eyes swell up because we're crying, sometimes that is because of an enlargement of that gland. And also because when we cry, it causes kind of more fluid to be found in the tissues, so your eyes will get puffy, okay? So these produce tears. These lubricate the eye. Right? LU, lubricate the eye.
I have a side question.
Yep.
Is that where if we get pink eye where the infection mostly is?
No, it's in your conjunctiva, which we'll talk about next. Yep. Lubricate. Okay. So it lubricates the eye, but it also protects against infection. So there's actually antibodies. So a specific type of antibodies, and these antibodies can bind to bacteria and render them harmless, and they can also stimulate white blood cells to come in and fight them. And then we also have enzymes that destroy bacteria. So we have kind of our own protection against pink eye, whether it's bacterial or virus. Viral because we do produce antibodies in the. Okay, so if we look at some of these structures in your book, they have pictures of them. So this is the, obviously the eyelid, right? And then this is the palpebral fissure. So that's that space between the two eyelids, okay? And then if we look at, this next one, oops. Okay, so this is actually the diagram with the lacrimal gland. So here's my lacrimal gland up there. Is that an endocrine gland or an exocrine gland? Exocrine, right? Because it has ducts. And so notice that the ducts are to the lateral edge of the eye. And so tears will normally be produced and then they travel to a little opening right here, which is called the lacrimal punctum. So the lacrimal punctum is what drains the tears. And these tears are ultimately deposited into the nasal cavity. So notice here there's a duct, the nasolacrimal duct, and then it goes into the nasal cavity. So that's why when you cry, your nose also runs. Sometimes this can be blocked, specifically in babies. Sometimes they're born with it blocked. So they say, oh, your baby's tear duct is blocked. And it's really scary because I had a daughter that had this when she was just a tiny baby. And you take her to the doctor and they just put a needle and they open up that duct with a needle. Yeah, they stick a needle in the eye, right? And open it up. So sometimes if the tears do not drain, then it makes their eyes look crusty. So it kind of like when you wake up this isn't the same kind of crust as the sand in your eyes, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you wake up and your eyes are like all like around them, you can see dried tears. That means that you have, and sometimes that happens after you cry and then you go to sleep, right? And you wake up and you got dried tears on your face. But when babies have that, they have just dried tears when that can lead to infection if it's not properly drained. And so then it gives, it turns kind of a greenish, yellowish color, and that can be bad. Okay, so there's another structure here, which is the very center of the eye, or the middle of the eye, right there on the outside. It's not the center, it's right here on the outside. And that is called the lacrimal caruncle. Go back here. So this is this pink tissue right here is called my lacrimal caruncle. And this is actually a gland. It is actually a sebaceous gland. And remember that we have sebaceous glands associated with our hair follicles. So these actually help to lubricate. And so this is what produces the sand, right? So this helps to lubricate the eye, right? But this is the sand after sleep, right? So when you wake up and you have to like go like this, get that stuff out of there, that's your the secretions of the lacrimal caruncle. Okay. Now covering the surface of the eye and lining underneath the eyelids is what is called the conjunctiva. This is a mucous membrane. And so this means that the outside of your eye is covered with this mucous membrane, except where the cornea is. So it'd be the white part of the eye. Okay, so it covers white part of the eye. And lines the eyelids. So when you get an infection, this is called conjunctivitis. So inflammation of the conjunctiva. So this is actually can be bacterial or virus. And there's a lot of debate about what to do with people that have conjunctivitis, because this is also sometimes referred to as pink eye, and it can be highly infectious. Right? And so people can give it to one another just simply by touching their eyes. That's why they say you should never touch your eye, right? You can get bacteria in there, and you can get the bacteria that causes pink eye. So the conjunctiva, if it is bacterial, then you could use antibiotics to cure it. If it's viral, antibiotics are not going to do any good. And so there's, unfortunately, I don't know if they still do it, but unfortunately in the past, if your child had pink eye, they wouldn't let them go to school or to daycare unless they got antibiotics, right? And so that is actually a bad practice. Because if it is caused by a virus, antibiotics are going to be overused in that instance. And so it's best just to keep, if you can, keep the child home for 7 days until it kind of disappears. But then you don't know if it's a virus. It's hard to tell whether it's a virus or bacteria. I don't know if they have a test for this. Does anybody know? The doctors, they don't. So then if it doesn't go away, you're like, oh, I just, now it's bacteria. But it could still go away because we have antibodies and we have enzymes that treat, And so I think that maybe treating all cases of pink eye with antibiotics is a bad practice simply because of the antibiotic resistance issue. It could just be a virus that will run its course in 7 days. But anybody who's had pink eye also knows that it can be really painful and your eyes can also itch. And when you have allergies, that can cause symptoms that are like pink eye, right? So allergies can also cause the conjunctiva to get bubbly and thick, right? And then it feels like you got something in your eye, and really it's just an inflammation of the conjunctiva. And so they do give you, or they can give you eye drops that will treat that inflammation of the conjunctiva due to allergies. Although I just went to my eye doctor and she said, Visine is really bad. You're not supposed to use Visine because especially because it takes out the redness, but it'll actually cause your eyes to be more red if you go off of them. So you constantly get addicted to them. And then your eyes will if you don't use them, your eyes go bloodshot, and it takes you a long time to kind of get back to homeostasis. So there's better options out there, the eye doctors recommend, than Visine. Okay. I had a nephew that was addicted to eye drops. It was like this kind that made it kind of minty, it was just like this refreshing, but he was constantly putting eye drops in his eyes. Okay, so if we look at the conjunctiva, right? So this is it right here. So you can see that it lines underneath the eyelids, right? Now there is one really bad bacterial infection that we do not have around here, but is a major leading cause of blindness in developing countries, and it is called trachoma. So trachoma is a bacterial infection. So this can actually lead to blindness because it gets underneath the eyelid and it causes cysts to form, and it's transmitted via flies. And so if a fly lands in your eyes, they can transmit that bacteria, and then it gets into underneath the eyelid, right? And it makes these little sacs, these little rough sacs. And then when you blink your eye, it actually causes you to scratch your cornea. So it would be really super painful, because if you've ever scratched your cornea, you know how painful that is, right? And so they inflame and thicken the eyelid, and then pretty soon the cornea is all scratched up and you are unable to see. Okay. So that would be a really horrible way to go blind, I think, because it would be extremely painful. It's just antibiotics. You just can cure it with antibiotics, but some places they don't have medical treatment for it. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the eye structures. Oh, here's my extrinsic eye muscles. So notice that they have little ligaments that attach to the eyeball. And so like this one, when it contracts, it would move the eye laterally. And then there's also one on the inside that would move it medially. The superior ones are going to cause your eye to move up. The inferior ones are going to cause your eye to move down. And this one's going to kind of rotate your eye inward, right? And so sometimes people have a lazy eye, right? One eye is not tracking the same as the other. And that could be due to muscles. And then also cross-eyed, you can have a muscle that's too strong and it's pulling your eyes inward. And so you can have surgery to repair both of those things, both of those causes or symptoms.
Why aren't we able to control, be able to, like how reptiles and them can,
We have an eye that is binocular vision. And so in order for us to see depth perception, our eyes have to be tracking the same way. So we wouldn't be able to see depth if one eye was looking this way and one way, if we were chameleons, like for example, and one way I was looking that way. That's just they need that more than they need binocular vision. Yeah. And the eyeballs on the side of the head, deer and stuff do not have good depth perception because their eyeballs are on the side and they're not facing the same way. But as we're kind of hunters, right? So we want depth. Okay. So if we look at the structure of the eyeball itself, we have 3 tunics. These are the same thing as layers, right? But they call them tunics. The outer tunic is called the sclera. So this is the outer tunic. And it consists of connective tissue. So this would be the white part of the eye. Okay, so it's underneath the conjunctiva. And then the part of the sclera that is transparent is called the cornea. So this is my transparent part of the sclera. So this is where light enters, and it covers the iris and the pupil. So the iris is what changes the shape of the pupil and either causes it to constrict or dilate. But the cornea isn't the iris, it just covers the iris. Right, so covers the iris. Okay. So the cornea has lots of pain receptors. So I'll put that under cornea. Lots of pain receptors. Right? So if you've ever scratched your cornea, you know that even when your eye is closed, you feel a lot of pain, right? And so generally you have to take pain medicine, pain pills for it. Not like oxycodone or anything, but it can be really hard to sleep if you have the cornea, a scratched cornea. And then it can get infected, and so you have to also take antibiotics if you scratch your cornea, okay? But this protects it from being scratched. Because it is connective tissue, and so it is not very vascularized. So there's no vascularization in the cornea. So there's no blood vessels going directly into the cornea. So it is hard to repair once it has been scratched, right? It doesn't easily repair itself. But because it has no vascular supply, that means it can be easily transplanted from one person to another. And I don't know if they actually have grown cornea in the lab or have created synthetic cornea, probably the next big thing. So you can get a cornea transplant if you have gone blind because the cornea has become opaque. That's not the same thing as cataracts. Cataracts are in the lens, so this is different. Okay, so
cadaver eye, so can't you have a cadaver eye transplant?
Maybe with the cornea, yeah. Okay, so we have the middle layer, which is the choroid. It is highly vascularized. So there's lots of blood supplied to it. And it is darkly colored. And it includes the iris. So what type of muscle is the iris? Smooth muscle. Remember, it's innervated by the autonomic nervous system to cause constriction and dilation. Okay, so this is the colored part of your eye. Has melanin in it. If it has lots of melanin, it's brown. If it has very little, it's blue. And then kind of a little bit in between and different shape of the iris, and then you get green. But it's all due to the same pigment, which is called melanin. Okay, so then we have the pupil, right? The pupil is just the opening. The choroid also includes the ciliary body. And this is a smooth muscle that attaches to the lens. Oops, that attaches to the lens. Okay, so this changes the shape of the lens so that it allows for accommodation, seeing close up versus seeing far away, right? So it changes the shape of the lens depending upon whether you're focusing close or in the distance. And we'll talk about being myopic versus being hyperopic, so being nearsighted versus farsighted in a little bit. Okay, so if we look at the structures here, you need to be able to identify these for the final exam and the midterm. So the outer part, notice that this is the sclera, so this outer part. The covering of the eye, the front covering, that would be the cornea, right? It's transparent, but it's still part of that outer tunic. Notice that the choroid is very dark in color. Notice that it has here would be the iris, which is changing the shape of the pupil and letting light to enter. And then we have the ciliary body, which is kind of cool because it has ligaments that attach to the lens and can either pull on the lens and cause it to become flatter and therefore be able to see more clearly distance objects, or let the lens bulge so that we can see close objects. So there's a little smooth muscle with little ligaments that attach directly to the lens. So the lens is actually not part of any of the three tunics. So the third tunic, this third layer right here, is in yellow. And we know that yellow in your book always means what type of tissue? What? Not adipose. Nope. What is always drawn in yellow? Like your spinal cord, your nerves, nervous tissue, right? So the third layer is the retina. And this is nervous tissue. There is no vascularization. So it gets its nutrients from the choroid. So it is not vascularized. Okay. It is also very thin and not well attached to the choroid. So sometimes people have problems with their eyes, and it can be due to retinal detachment. This can just occur under normal circumstances, but if you get a hit to the head, then you might be more likely to get retinal detachment. And then they have to go in and try to surgically reattach it, to go in and try to repair it. But that can lead to loss of vision. This is where we have the photoreceptors. So this is where photoreceptors are located. So everything else in the eye is responsible for focusing that light directly onto the retina. So the photoreceptors can absorb the light energy, transduce it into an action potential, and send it out of the eye via the optic nerve. Okay, so the optic nerve innervates the retina. And where it innervates the retina, this is what is referred to as your blind spot. They call this also the optic disc. So it is really true that, you say, I did not see that car. I looked down the road when I was trying to come out and there was no car there. And then I pulled out an intersection and I got hit, right? It probably, or it could have been that you actually looked in your peripheral vision, you didn't turn your head, right? So if I'm looking and trying to figure out where cars are coming, you want to physically turn your head. Because if you just look in your peripheral vision, there's a spot there that if that image of that car lands right there, your brain will not see it, right? Your brain will just fill in an empty road. So if we look at where this is located kind of off to the side, right? So off to the side in the peripheral vision. Now the macula right here is an area where is the center of the retina. So let's put this in the periphery of retina. The macula is the center of the retina. So sometimes you can get, and actually this is the most common problem with eyes, maybe in our country, is what is called the macular degeneration problem. And this is where we get fatty deposits in the retina that makes the center of your vision start to be lost. Okay, so fatty deposits cause loss of vision in the center. So I had an image. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so this is what it would appear. This is the symptoms, right? And so it would appear that you're just getting a hole in your vision, right? And so then you just retain your your peripheral vision, and you can't see the center. And so this is why they take a picture of your eye. So when they take that picture of your eye, if you've been to the eye doctor lately, the picture of the macula. You haven't been to the eye doctor?
No, but every time I get a physical, I got 20/20, so I just don't go.
Okay. So what they do is they shine a light in your eye and they take a picture. And then it comes up on a screen and then they show it to you. They go, okay, so this is your retina, okay? It's very, very thin. These blood vessels are actually in the choroid. Okay? And so then they're looking for this spot right here. Right? And they're saying, oh, all of this looks good. There's no blocked blood vessels, right? And this doesn't have any fatty deposits in it. So if you look at a person that has macular degeneration, then it's going to look more like, let's see if I can find. Right? So this is what it's going to look like. They're going to go, oh, geez, look at the dark spots on your eye, right? And so one leading cause of this is smoking. And so, I don't know, there are exercise and diet plays a role too, but smoking is a real predisposition for getting macular degeneration. Okay. Okay, so we talked about dilation and constriction, specifically when we're talking about the fight or flight, right? But when you dilate your eyes, you're letting in a lot of light. And so that can be bad because it could actually burn out your photoreceptors. So the pupil actually protects the eye from excessive light. Pupil size. So if you go to the doctor and they give you a drug that dilates your eyes, they give you sunglasses and they say, don't take these sunglasses on. Right? So especially when you're outside, because you could get too much light going into your eye and it could permanently cause permanent damage to your photoreceptors. And that would be a really bad thing. We talked about how the parasympathetic causes constriction, and then the sympathetic causes dilation, and that's because they act on two different sets of muscles. You don't need to know the names of them, two different muscles, but those are examples of smooth muscle. I want to talk about we'll talk about the retina. Okay, so the retina, let's talk about the photoreceptors. So you have two different types of photoreceptors in your retina. Does anybody know what they're called? Yes. So rods, right? And I'm going to put cones over here. And they're named this because of the way they're shaped. So the rods are rod-shaped, the cones are cone-shaped. Okay? So the rods are responsible for black and white vision. They are in the periphery of the retina. They are also very sensitive to light levels. So it's very sensitive to low light. So this is why under conditions of low light, things turn gray. So the whole basis of dusk, things go from being bright and colorful to being kind of grayish during dusk because your eyes are not receiving enough light. The cones are not receiving enough light to fire. So you actually go to black and white vision, right? So when we talk about this, this is essentially nocturnal sight. Oops, sight, spelled like that. Nocturnal means night. So this is why they say the cats can only see in black and white, because they have actually evolved to not have color vision, because they generally prey, their biggest moments or their biggest periods of predation are during the early mornings and the late nights, right, or the early evenings, the dusk period, muscular. So they have only rods, and that just makes them better able to see under low levels of light. The other thing that's kind of cool about this is that if you ever take an astronomy class, they'll tell you that if you see a dim object in the sky, you want to actually look at it in your peripheral vision. So you actually, not your blind spot, but your peripheral vision, so that I can see it, like I could see a dim star, but if I look directly at it, it is hitting my cones, but it's not enough light to fire my cones, and so I can't see it if I'm looking straight on. I can only see it if I'm looking in my peripheral vision. So this is color vision. And there's actually 3 different types. So there's red, green, and blue. The red, green, and blue cones. And they absorb different wavelengths of light. They are in the center of the retina, the macula. And they are less sensitive to light. And this is diurnal sight vision. The diurnal means during the day. And so birds, which are active during the day and tend to roost at night, have color vision. They also have color vision because they have bright plumage, a lot of them do, and they use that for communication. So birds can see color. So any organism that relies upon being able to see color, like the octopus or the squid, they can see flashes of different colors. They would have to have cones in order to see those colors. Okay. So the interesting thing about our photoreceptors is that they are actually located behind these other cells that are going to pick up the action potential and transmit it into the central nervous system. So these right here, these are where my cones are. My cones and my rods are located right here. So this is nervous tissue in front. So the weird thing about our nervous system is that you would never build anything like this, because it would be like having your wiring coming out of the front of your television set instead of the back. So there's all these wires, these neurons wired in here, and then light actually has to travel through all this nervous tissue to actually stimulate the receptors. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at the octopus eye, they do not have this configuration. They have their photoreceptors right out front and then the neurons coming out of the back. So they actually have a kind of a better designed eye, the octopus and the squid, than the vertebrates do. So this is my diagram. So this would be a cone, right? The shape, and this would be my rod. And then notice that they synapse with these other cells that are called the bipolar and ganglion. You didn't need to know that. But then they eventually will send an action potential into the central nervous system. And then this is actually a picture, electron micrograph. So this is actually the real image looking at the different layers of the retina. Maybe the photoreceptors are there right here because then they would be close to the nutrients that are provided by the choroid. That's a possibility, I guess. Oh, and here's my pictures. Okay. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about are the chambers and the fluids in the eye. So we have a chamber in the front of our eye that is called an anterior segment. And I'll put or chamber. I don't really like calling it a segment. In your book, they kind of label that as. And so this anterior segment would be like right underneath the cornea and kind of between the, it would be a fluid that is filling the iris, kind of bathing the iris and filling the pupil up. And so this contains what is called aqueous humor. This is watery. So aqueous, watery. Humor means this is a fluid that is found in the eye. It also is continually produced and reabsorbed. So it provides nutrients, oxygen, and ions. So energy, oxygen, and ions to the structures in the eye. In the anterior of the eye. So like the cornea, the iris, the ciliary body, and actually also the lens. So that's its kind of its function. So it is actually produced by capillaries that produce, this is a byproduct, is produced from blood. And so if we look at a diagram here, you just need to know that this is my anterior segment. So this is my anterior chamber right here. Okay. So I'm not going to make you memorize anterior chamber versus posterior chamber versus anterior segment. So here it is produced by capillaries. And so notice the capillaries right here are right here. And then it circulates, and then it's supposed to drain. And they'd be picked up by the venous circulation. So what disease, what eye disease is caused by having too much fluid in the anterior segment? Anybody want to take a guess? What is an eye disease that is associated with diabetes? If you have diabetes, you're much more likely to get this. It's G, glaucoma, yes. So glaucoma is too much aqueous humor. And so they say that you have high intraocular pressure. Intraocular pressure. So how do they, that's an A, intraocular. How do they test for this? Yes, it's a really annoying one where they do the puff of light, or the air, puff of air, excuse me, and it causes this to depress. So it would cause your cornea to depress. And if you have lots of aqueous humor in there, then if you applied air to this, it would not depress at all. It would just be rigid, right? And that would say that you have too much pressure in your eye, and you would take drugs to try to treat this, because it could lead eventually to blindness, because it could put pressure on the retina and could cause damage to the nervous tissue in the retina. So then we have the posterior segment. Okay, or chamber. And this is filled with the vitreous humor. So vitreous actually means thick. Right? So this is gel-like in its structure. So it's thick gel-like stuff. And this is produced embryonically. So when you're an embryo, you produce this vitreous humor, and then it stays with you for the rest of your life. So it's not produced and circulated and reabsorbed, right? And it actually gives the eyeball its shape. So it helps give the eye its shape, right? And also, light has to be transmitted through it, right? So we'll say that light gets transmitted through this gel-like structure. On the way to the retina. So we're going to do a dissection of a cow eye. And when you cut it open, you want to be very careful because the vitreous or the aqueous humor can squirt out, but then the vitreous humor is going to be jelly-like, right? You can just kind of move it out with your thumb or finger so that you can see the different tissue layers inside the eye. So if we look at our diagram, oops, that's my lens. I haven't gotten to there, sorry. I thought I had a picture of the vitreous humor. Maybe it's back here. Okay, I don't have a good picture of that, but this is the posterior segment. So most of the eye is filled with the vitreous humor, not the aqueous humor. Okay, so we'll continue on with the special senses on Monday, and then we'll have a quiz when? Monday? Monday, yes. No, we don't have class on Monday. Yay! So the quiz will be next Wednesday. It's a 3-day weekend. And Jenna, I have your